One daughter is not enough. You will sacrifice 2 of your daughters every year. If you fail, your entire lineage will perish.
Then she saw a small crevice between the jagged walls. Just as she tried to slide into the crevice, a dark shadow loomed before her. Its glowing yellow eyes locked into hers, and in that moment, pure terror gripped her heart. The beast exhaled a deep guttural growl, its nostrils flaring as it caught her scent. Panic overtook her, and in fear, she let out a sharp scream before turning to bolt in the opposite direction. The creature, now aware of her exact location, roared and lunged forward. With a deafening snarl, it opened its massive jaws and spewed out a stream of fire. Adanne barely managed to dive away, rolling frantically across the uneven ground. The flames missed her by mere inches, but the heat singed her leg, leaving a painful burn. Gritting her teeth, she forced herself to her feet and ran, her injured leg slowing her slightly. She could hear the beast behind her, its heavy footsteps shaking the earth as it pursued her. Her lungs burned as she ran, her eyes scanning for any possible escape. Then, just ahead, she saw it, a narrow crevice in the rock. Wow. With one final push, she threw herself inside, pressing her body against the stone as tightly as she could. The beast skidded to a halt outside, sniffing the air. It let out a huff, then turned its head toward the opening of the crevice. A deep guttural voice emerged from the creature.
I know you're here.
It rumbled, its words slow and eerie.
You better come out so I can eat you in peace.
Adanne's entire body trembled as she beat back a sob. The monster could talk? What kind of creature was this? Tears blurred her vision as she clutched her arms tightly around herself. How did I let myself get into this? She thought. Despair weighing heavily on her chest. If only I had listened to Norma. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to disappear. But the creature outside chuckled darkly, its jagged claws scraping against the rock as it waited. She had to think fast. If she stayed here, she was dead. If she moved, she might still have a chance. Then, a sound, soft but deliberate, came from behind her, deep within the crevice. A hand reached out and gently touched her arm. She gasped and turned, ready to scream, but a woman's voice whispered, "Shh, come with me." Adanne managed to squeeze herself through this narrow crevice, dragging her aching body forward inch by inch. Her burned leg throbbed with every movement, but she pressed on, driven by pure desperation. Finally, she emerged into a wider cavern and sat upright, her breath sharp and ragged. She looked around, but to her surprise, she saw no one. Had she imagined the voice? Was she dreaming? Confused and exhausted, she leaned against the cool rock wall, but then something caught her eye. Above her was a jagged opening in the roof of the cavern. The walls around it sparkled with crystals, casting faint bluish glows. Without thinking, Adanne began to climb. Her hands slipped and the crystals caught into her palms, but she didn't care. She had to escape. Higher and higher she went, her blood leaving small smears along the sharp edges. When she looked down, the cavern was dark and quiet. The creature was nowhere to be seen, but she didn't stop. She climbed until she finally reached the top and pulled herself out. Adanne found herself standing at the steep edge of a high mountain. She looked down and her heart dropped. There was no path, no trail, just a deadly drop below. It was either she jumped to her death or go back and be eaten by the creature. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she closed her eyes. She stood frozen, trying to decide her fate. But before she could act, a sudden blast of heat surged toward her. The dragon had returned. With a deafening roar, it spat fire in her direction. The force knocked her backward and she screamed as she fell through the opening she had just escaped from. She tumbled down the crystal wall, her body hitting hard until she blacked out. Back in the kingdom of Azuka, two women were tending to a farmland near the village when a monstrous shadow swept across the sky. They looked up in terror as the enormous dragon flew overhead, and without warning, it released a stream of fire. The farmland erupted in flames. The women burned before they could run. Screams filled the air as the dragon flew over the palace, setting a section of it ablaze with another wave of fire. Guards ran in panic. People scattered and smoke darkened the sky. The queen rushed out, her robe trailing behind her. She froze as the dragon hovered in the sky above her, its eyes glowing with fury.
This is just a warning.
The dragon growled in a deep, thunderous voice before turning and flying away. The queen fell to her knees, her face pale with shock. She knew what this meant. The sacrifice of royal blood was not accepted. If she did not act quickly, the entire kingdom of Azuka would be reduced to ashes. Adanne awoke in complete darkness. Her entire body ached from the fall. Slowly she sat up, wincing in pain. But before she could move, two ghost-like figures appeared, floating toward her. Their faces were pale and their eyes hollow. Adanne gasped and scrambled backward in fear. As she turned to run, she was met by two giant snakes slithering toward her, their eyes glowing. Adanne screamed and darted in the opposite direction. Green flames suddenly erupted in front of her, burning fiercely. Terrified, she turned again, only to see the dragon now walking slowly toward her. Tears filled her eyes as she realized there was nowhere else to run. The ghostly figures moved closer.
Do not be afraid,
one whispered.
we were once like you.
Adanne froze.
We were maidens.
The second ghost continued.
Promised a life of love and royalty, married to Prince Chidubem, only to be thrown into the dragon's snare as sacrifices.
Adanne shook her head in disbelief.
We were weak,
one said sadly.
but you, Adanne, you are different. You are brave. You must avenge us. Free the people of Azuka from the royal evil.
Adanne was still trying to comprehend their words when a violent wind swept through the cavern, lifting her off her feet. She screamed, spinning through the air, and then she jolted awake. Adanne looked around in fear, unsure if she was alive or dead. She pinched herself. She was alive. She sat up slowly and noticed something strange. There was a glowing blue pond nearby, surrounded by tiny glowing worms. Her throat was dry, her body weak. Limping, Adanne made her way to the water, and as she bent down to drink, a sudden force pushed her into the water. Adanne struggled under the surface, her arms flailing until she finally emerged, coughing and gasping for breath. As she sat down on the edge of the pond, she noticed the glowing worms had clung to her wounds. Panicked, she jumped up, brushing them off, only to realize the pain was gone and her wounds were healed. Wow. Adanne touched her leg, her arms, no more burns, no more cuts. The glowworms had healing properties. Grateful, Adanne quickly gathered some of the glowworms, tore a strip of cloth from her dress, and wrapped them carefully. She stood tall. Her mind was made up. She had to survive. She had to find a way to defeat the dragon, escape the pit, and save the people from the evil royal household. Meanwhile, in the land of Azuka, preparations were being made for another royal wedding. The queen, knowing the last bride sacrifice was a total waste, was desperate. She had to offer another bride quickly or risk the dragon burning the entire kingdom. That was the price they paid for stealing the golden egg. Far beneath the earth, in the dragon's lair, Adanne walked with purpose. Her wounds were healed, and her strength was returning. The glowworms, now carefully wrapped in the torn cloth, pulsed with soft blue light as she moved deeper into the cavern. Each step echoing through the darkness, she walked through a narrow tunnel until it opened into another vast hollow chamber. The walls were covered in strange carvings, symbols, and drawings that looked like stories etched in stone. Tracing one with her fingers, it showed a woman standing before a beast and rising above it. Could it be a prophecy? As she stared at them, horrified by what they revealed, her thoughts were interrupted by a cracking sound. Driven by instinct, she walked toward the sound. There, she saw a small ancient door with a glowing stone in its center. Adanne pressed her hand against the glowing mark at the center of the door. It shuddered, then creaked open, revealing a hidden path lined with torches that lit themselves one by one as she stepped forward. The air grew warmer and thick with an ancient scent, earth, fire, and blood. As she descended the spiraling stone path, Adanne saw the remains of torn veils, golden jewelry, and faded flower crowns scattered across the floor. Items from the previous brides. Her heart clenched. So many had died here, lost to the lights of royalty. As she ventured deeper into the cavern, the horror in the items she had seen made her shiver. She could feel the truth in them. Then she heard it. A growl.
You can hide,
Came the deep, terrible voice.
but no one lives here alive.
Adanne turned in fear but saw nothing. Then she ran out toward an open space and stood in the center. "I am not your enemy," she cried. "I was promised a good life if I married the Prince of Azuka. Why do you want to kill me?" The dragon responded with a burst of fire. Adanne ducked, but the flames scorched her arm. Screaming in pain, she quickly swallowed one of the glowworms and instantly her skin healed. She then dove behind a large stone. The dragon prowled nearby, sniffing.
Come out, let me eat you in peace. Stop pretending to be brave.
From her hiding place, Adanne noticed something. Though the dragon's eyes glowed fiercely, they didn't focus. It was blind. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I am not a princess. The prince's blood was mixed with mine. That's why I smell royal." The dragon growled, furious.
Lies. The king broke my only egg. In return, he promised 2 princesses every year. Just come out.
"No!" Adanne shouted. "I am not your enemy. You have been deceived like me." But the dragon roared and released another wave of fire. It struck near her hiding place and sent her flying. She hit her head hard against a rock and fell, weak and dizzy. Tears filled her eyes. The dragon lunged, spitting fire again. But with all her strength, Adanne rolled away and the flames struck the stone behind her instead and bounced back. The dragon shrieked as the fire burned its own flesh. He has been burnt by his own fire. Adanne stood and limped toward it. "I told you the truth," she said. "You just didn't want to listen." The dragon groaned.
No one has ever fought back. You were brave. Just end it now. I cannot live with this shame.
Adanne hesitated for a while. Then she opened the cloth and poured the glowworms over the dragon. A soft blue light covered its scales. The dragon screamed in pain. Then slowly its body slumped and everything went still. In the royal palace of Azuka, the wedding ceremony was about to begin. Guests filled the royal courtyard, dressed in their finest traditional attires. Laughter and music filled the air. Prince Chidubem stood tall and proud at the end of the aisle, dressed in fine gold robes, a bright smile on his face as he awaited his bride. Urena, the bride-to-be, wore a stunning red and gold wedding attire. Her father proudly held her hand as they walked down the aisle. All eyes were on her, admiration etched into every guest's face. Then, without warning, the grand doors burst open. Everyone turned. Standing at the entrance was Adanne, dirty, barefoot, yet whole. Her eyes glowed with fire, and there wasn't a single wound on her body. The queen's eyes widened in terror. "What is this good-for-nothing doing here?" she gasped. Prince Chidubem turned to his mother, stunned.
"I thought she was dead."
"No, my prince," Adanne said calmly, stepping forward. "I am very much alive." Gasps filled the air as Adanne mounted the stage. "If you value your life," she warned, turning to the stunned guests, "leave now while you still can." Whispers and murmurs filled the air. The queen snapped, "Guards! Get that tramp out of here! Throw her into the dungeon!" She turned to the guests with a forced smile. "Apologies for the disturbance. Let the wedding continue." But the guards hesitated. Fear flickered in their eyes. No one had ever returned from the dragon's lair alive and unharmed. They stepped back, disobeyed a royal order. Urana, overwhelmed with fear, turned and ran. Her family followed her out of the courtyard. The queen shouted again, but her words were drowned as the palace gate slammed shut. The sky darkened. Then, a terrifying roar echoed across the land. Before anyone could react, the dragon descended. With one mighty breath, it unleashed a torrent of fire upon the palace. Flames engulfed the courtyard. Guests screamed. Nobles fell. The prince cried in pain. The queen cried for help, but none came. They all burned to ashes, and from their ashes, Adanne rose. With the bloodline of King Obiora burnt to ashes in dragon fire, the cursed lineage ended where it began, in betrayal and flame. The throne, cleansed by justice and sacrifice, was rightfully restored to Prince Iruka, the first son of the late King Abani. He married Adanne, the brave maiden who survived the pit and ended the dragon's terror. Together, they ruled Azuka with wisdom, compassion, and fairness. Under their reign, the kingdom flourished like never before. No more bloodshed, no more fear. And so, the people of Azuka learned a truth too long buried. Greed may win you a crown, but only truth and courage can keep it. Evil may thrive for a time, but in the end, it always burns. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more interesting stories, please consider subscribing to this channel, not forgetting to turn on the bell notification icon so that once another video is being posted, you will be the first to be notified. You can also check out these videos here. I promise you won't be disappointed. Till we meet again in my next video, remain blessed.